Remember to like and subscribe. Ex-con jumped out the window half naked when I caught him in bed with my wife. Last year I did the hardest thing I could do, and that was divorce my wife. I can't understand why she broke up our family, so maybe I'm trying to gain that here. I know my friends would say to just get over it, but it makes my head spin sometimes, I can't lie. My wife was messing around with her ex. Even though she was better off by leaving him. I am 34, met my wife, F31, on the bus going to work 7 years ago. She got on the bus 3 stops after me, and I would always stare at her. There were a few pretty girls that would get on the bus, but she was my favorite. One day, the bus driver hopped off the bus to go into a convenience store, and we just looked at each other and laughed. We talked about how weird that was, and we've talked ever since. While we were riding the bus and talking, she would bring up her boyfriend, Keith, and always complain about him. She would always catch him cheating with the mother of his child and he would deny it. His son's mother didn't like her, so they never really got along, and it would cause them to always be separated. I really cared about her, so I would tell her to just leave since he was a clown, but she would still stay. I didn't know how to get her out of the dumb love triangle she was in. All that changed when my father gave me his SUV when he upgraded his car with no charge. This was great, and one of the first things I wanted to do was pick her up from the bus stop. When I got the car, I started picking her up and taking her to work, something her ex didn't do. Even though she got to work earlier, she was happy then. I started taking her to other places just to hang out. We had so much in common, especially since she had family that lived in Guayanilla, where I grew up. After a while, I decided to shoot my shot and told her how I felt and that she should leave her boyfriend. She tried to give me a bunch of excuses but failed to give me a good reason to stay with him. A few days later, she called me and told me she wanted to hang out for the weekend. When I picked her up, she told me she was done with him and his situation with his child's mother. After that, we were officially dating. We dated for about 3 years before we got married. She was definitely happy to be in a relationship with me and bragged to her friends about how great I was. This had made me feel good, and I thought we seemed like those funny TikTok couples she looked at. She started talking about marriage, and I proposed soon after that. We were so in bliss after I proposed that we actually got pregnant before getting married. After getting married, we had 2 daughters and a nice home to live in. There was very little for me to complain about at the time. We were the typical family, running around after our daughters, who were 5 and 3 years old, and going to work. I always treated her right, and I tried to balance being a good father and husband. She would do the same, although it was a challenge because our daughters were definitely a handful. One day, my cousin Anthony canceled on me because his mom was getting out of the hospital. Since he was picking her up, I decided to take my wife's car to finally get her check engine light taken care of. After walking out of the shop, I opened her glove compartment to put the paperwork inside for later. When I opened it up, a bunch of crap fell out, and I had to pick it up. While I was cleaning it up, I found a pretty recent picture of her with her ex-boyfriend, Keith. The picture surprised me because it was a picture of him locked up somewhere. In the picture with him was my wife and his sister, Nadine. This surprised me because I never heard about her visiting him while he was locked up. I didn't even know he was locked up. He got a little heavier, his dreads were longer, and he was wearing glasses he didn't need, but it was definitely him. After cleaning up the mess, I drove home with a bunch of crap on my mind. I couldn't understand why she was going to meet him while he was locked up, and why I wasn't told about this. It gave me a sinking feeling about this, especially since it was so hard to get her to leave the love triangle situation she was in. When I got home, my wife was watching TV, and I went straight to the computer. I did a deep dive and I found out more about the situation. Apparently, I knew I wasn't going to find anything on her social media, so I checked his sister Nadine's page. I found out he's been out for 3 years thanks to the pics. Looking further through Nadine's friends, there were pictures of my wife with Keith and Nadine at a couple of places and parties. Seeing this got me emotional, and I had to ask her about it and see what she had to say. I started up a conversation with my wife, and I casually asked if she had heard from Keith. She looked at me confused and told me she hadn't heard from him. I couldn't believe she had just lied to me in my face, and I knew I couldn't trust her anymore. When that happened, I started thinking about all the things I should have noticed that were going on. She was gone more often, she stayed up later on the phone, and she avoided romantic gestures towards me. After she lied, I started snooping for some answers. To catch her slipping, I took on more responsibility with the kids so that she might use her free time to make a mistake around me. After a few days, she slipped up and told him she was going to be taking my kids to see my parents. After hanging with my kids and my parents, I called the old lady who lives next door and asked if she saw anybody come over to my house. She said she had a while ago, and it was the same car she usually had. This surprised me because even our neighbor knew Keith was coming over. Even though I didn't know everything yet, I was still mad because deep down I knew what was up. When we got back, I asked her if she had any friends over, and she said no, and she just took a nap. This was bullshit, so I was really ready to leave her. That weekend, I made up an excuse to leave the house all day. I told her I was going to take my kids to their classmate's house to play, and then I was going to see my cousin Anthony. When that Saturday came, I took the kids to the house and waited by hanging out at a nearby restaurant. After hanging out for 3 hours, I called her and got no answer. I called one more time and she still didn't answer, and that wasn't normal for her. After that, I drove onto my street and parked at the end of it. I was walking back to the house and his car was there, and I got mad, but still held it together. We lived in a ranch-style house, so I couldn't go through because we didn't have an upstairs to sneak in. This meant I had to go in through the back, where our kitchen was. When I went in, when I got to the living room, I could already hear them. Apparently, they left the bedroom door open, and when I looked inside, I was devastated to see him bang her in our bed. I just froze and I had to stop myself from being zoned out. After snapping back to reality, I went next door to see my neighbor, so when I confronted her, I had a real witness to everything. After knocking on the door, her son opened the door, which was actually better. He asked me how I was doing, and I asked him if he could help me with something in the house. He asked me what it was, and I said I just really needed him to keep his eye on something for me. He said okay and to give him a while because he was tending to his kids. After that, I went back to my house and waited for him to come over for about 15 minutes. This was hard to do because I had to see and hear him banging my wife while holding it up for him. When he finally came in, I told him to wait in the living room, and I walked in and confronted them both. It was a real mess, and when we started all the shouting, our neighbor's son came in to see what was going on. When he came in, Keith thought we were going to jump him, so he hopped out of our room window half-dressed, and my wife was embarrassed because she had on nothing but her socks. After shouting that I wanted a divorce, she yelled back at me, "F you," and we just left back to my neighbor's house. I thanked him for having my back and apologized that I didn't tell him what was going on. I told him I didn't think he would come over if I told him, and he laughed and said I was right. He said he only intended to bring his kids over to see their grandmother, not all this. When night came, I left for my cousin's house to be with him and his girlfriend. While driving there, my wife called me to curse me out. I told her I did everything for her and she disrespected me in the worst way. She claimed it was my fault, that I had duped her into marrying me and having children when all she wanted to do was work things out with Keith. When she said that I had no feelings for her, I told her since she regretted having my kids, then she didn't have to worry about them anymore. She tried to say that's not what she meant, but I hung up on her. She can say what she wants about me, she can even say she regrets marrying me, but I won't allow her to disrespect my kids. When I got to my cousin's house, I told him everything, and he and his girlfriend never left my side, even through the divorce. I thought it brought us even closer. Through the divorce, I ended up getting screwed over hard because not only did I have to pay alimony and child support, but she got the kids too. Afterwards, she called me and tried to apologize for what she had said about the kids. She said she loved our daughters and didn't regret having them, and I asked if her love was the reason she destroyed our family. She said she didn't mean to do it, but everything changed when she ran into Keith's sister, Nadine. She said she ran into her while out at lunch at her job and they started to catch up. She said she asked Nadine about Keith, and Nadine said he had gotten locked up. Apparently, he got stopped for a DUI, and when the cops searched the car, they found marijuana on him and his friends. Plus, they found out the police were already looking for him, so he ended up being brought in. After hearing this, my wife felt bad, and Nadine asked her if she could help support him while he was in jail, and she agreed. After he made parole, he reconnected with her and apologized for how he treated her, and after reconnecting, the affair started for about 2 years. I knew he meant none of it, and recently I heard I was right. A friend of mine told me he ran into a friend of hers and recognized him from hanging with me and my cousin. She asked him how I was, and he said I was good. As he asked her how my ex was, she shook her head and told him she should have just stayed with me. Apparently, he was still messing around with his son's mother, so Keith was banging them both. Hearing this just made me roll my eyes, and I changed the subject. I tried to save her from this stupid love triangle, but she's still falling for the BS. It's clear he was always a clown, but after seeing what I saw, she liked being treated like another hoe. She just can't seem to understand that he's not going to let go of his child's mother. If you hear a girl you like talking about her ex all the time, you better run for the hills.